Hello and welcome to week 5. In week 5, we're going to turn from qualitative research and start looking at quantitative research, and we're actually going to spend 2 weeks on quantitative research. And in spite of my enduring love of qualitative research, I must admit that most business research is quantitative in nature, so it makes sense that we spend a little bit more time on quantitative methods. So we're going to kick that off chapter 13 and talking about some basic building blocks of quantitative research, and that is measurement and scaling. So how do we measure things in the real world in such a way that what we get in return is numbers? So we're going to talk about different levels of scale measurement. We're going to talk about index and composite scales. We're going to talk about 3 criteria for good measurement, and chief among those are reliability and validity. So in any good research, if you're using a scale, a measure that is a combination of multiple questions, or just a single question rated on some sort of numerical scale, we're going to want to assess the reliability and validity of that measure. And so we'll talk about what those terms mean and how to test for them. In chapter 14, we're going to look at a specific measurement that is very important to business, and that is attitude measurement. If you've ever answered a survey, you've likely answered some scale questions about your attitudes. To what extent do you agree or disagree with the following statements? Point University is an excellent option for an MBA, for instance. And you might have rated that on a scale of strongly agree, somewhat agree, neither agree nor disagree, somewhat disagree, or strongly disagree. And that's called a Likert scale. So that's one example of how researchers attempt to measure an attitude, which is what's called a latent construct. It's something that that can't itself be perceived. It can't be sensed through our 5 senses. But what we can do is come up with questions that measure outcomes of that attitude, or symptoms of that underlying attitude. So we'll talk about some basic approaches to measuring attitudes using rating scales as a way of measuring attitudes. We'll talk about how we create measures to represent a latent construct, and we will talk about ranking and sorting techniques as ways of measuring attitudes. So chapter 14 is all about the various ways that marketers use to measure attitude. And then chapter 15 has to do with questionnaire design. And so we're going to talk about the significance of decisions about questionnaire design and wording, how things just like the wording of the questions or the design of the questionnaire can impact the results and create error if we're not careful. So we'll talk about alternatives for wording different types of questions. We'll talk about guidelines for writing questions that avoid errors and mistakes. And we'll talk about how even the layout and the sequence of questions can improve a questionnaire. And you will develop a questionnaire. Your research deliverable for this week is a survey instrument. And so hopefully you will take the measurement concepts that we've learned this week and create a good, valid, and reliable and sensitive survey instrument that will enable you to collect data that will enable you to answer your research questions. Other due dates are as they have been, so no surprises there. And just continue to work hard on your research project, and the survey instrument that you develop this week you'll actually implement next week and collect data And hopefully this is all in keeping with your research plan and gathering data that is going to answer your research questions. So have a great week, and as always, please email me or get in touch with me somehow if I can be of assistance in any way.